Hi everyone, this is the first video introducing Psychology 444. I think the title of the course is Principles of Behavior Modification, but I'm going to be teaching this course really as an introduction to Applied Behavior Analysis, or ABA. I'm Matt Andrzejewski, and I'll be your instructor for the semester. So the course is going to be laid out. It's all online in unit format, and I'm going to go through the syllabus in a little bit. But first, I just want to talk about the goals of the course, a little bit about me, and what you can expect, and what is different about behavior analysis and behavior modification. So hopefully at the end of the course, you're going to be able to talk a little bit about the principles of behavior analysis, be able to describe potential advantages and disadvantages, and regarding the ethical use of behavior change strategies, develop descriptive and measurable definitions for observable behavior, describe and identify a variety of methods of measuring behavior, identify potential controlling variables, identify methods of testing and functional relations between behavior and controlling variables, identify strategies for increasing behavior, for decreasing behavior, and how to measure that change. So the focus really is on behavior, that is what people and animals do. And behavior analysis is the science of that is trying to understand behavior as the subject matter, not as an index of mind or process going on somewhere else. That's what we call methodological behaviorism, but this course is going to be about behavior analysis. If you've never heard of behavior analysis before, you probably should have. You should have been introduced to it at least a little bit in learning and conditioning. If you took Psych 303, which is, I believe, a prerequisite for this course, you were introduced to the principles of behavior analysis, like positive reinforcement, stimulus control, etc., etc. So I have been described as a psychologist, an experimental psychologist, a behavior analyst, behavioral economist, a behavioral neuroscientist, a behavioral pharmacologist, a neurobiologist, a neuropharmacologist, a behavioral neurobiologist, a behavioral neuropharmacologist, a psychoneuropharmacologist. I've been called a lot of things, but principally, first and foremost, I am a behavior analyst. I came to psychology because of behavior analysis. As an undergrad, actually, I was a history major, but then I started working with people that I needed to employ some behavior change strategies, and that's how I was introduced to behavior analysis. So I was introduced actually to behavior analysis before I really was introduced to psychology. It was only in my graduate coursework that I actually took psychology courses. Prior to that, I just had education and courses in behavior analysis. You could think of behavior analysis as part of psychology, but certainly not the entire part. Behavioral neuroscience also overlaps with both psychology and behavior analysis, as does pharmacology, the study of drug effects on behavior. Behavioral economics is the study of economic variables that affect behavior, and I'm somewhere in between there, that little spot there. I do a little bit of all. My family of intellectuals or academics or my sort of intellectual family starts with B.F. Skinner, believe it or not. B.F. Skinner had a student named Richard Herrnstein. We're going to be hearing a lot about B.F. Skinner and Richard Herrnstein. They had a student, Richard Herrnstein had a student named Phil Heinlein, and I was a student of Phil Heinlein. So Skinner is like my great-grandfather, if you will. There's many links around this family of behavior analysis that I'm part of. They include Tim Hackenberg, who's also a student of Phil Heinlein's, who was a mentor for Rochelle Yanklevich, who used to teach at UW-Whitewater. My postdoctoral mentor, Ann Kelly, was also a mentor to Dr. Meg Warszynski, which she taught 303. Dr. Warszynski also was a contemporary with Jim Mazur, and the Learning and Behavior book that you used in 303, either if you took it with me or with Dr. Warszynski, the author of that textbook was Jim Mazur. These other people up over here include Suzanne Mitchell, who was a student of Howard Racklin's, who was also a student of Richard Herrnstein's, Recklin and Heinlein were actually contemporaries in lab. Suzanne Mitchell was the postdoctoral mentor of Rochelle, and she's a noted behavioral economist and someone whose work I follow pretty closely. There's other people involved. A collaborator of mine, Brian Baldo, took classes with Jim Mazur and so on. There's even some unusual links to me, including Art Glenberg. Art Glenberg and I wrote a statistics textbook together, and his student at UW-Madison, one of his students included Dr. Havis, who you might have had classes with. So it's a big, happy family, if you will. But it's pretty diverse and a lot of different ideas and so on. I'm qualified to teach this class because one of my first jobs out of college was in working with adults with disabilities, autism, namely at this Specialized Living Center in Southern Illinois. And then I worked for the State Department of Mental Health in Missouri at Bell Fountain Rehabilitation Center. And then I moved to Delaware and worked for an agency, a school called The Chimes, where I worked with young people with autism and Prader-Willi syndrome and very difficult, challenging behavior problems. I've had various consulting jobs advising people and treatment teams on various things. I also received my master's in applied behavior analysis from Temple University, where I did 2 internships, one at the Delaware Autistic Program and one at the Thomas Jefferson University Narcotics Addiction Research Program. I've published in the field of applied behavior analysis, including working with Prader-Willi syndrome, people with Prader-Willi syndrome, and how behavior analysis can work with them. I also published a paper on some work that I did at the Narcotics Addiction Research Program, working with methadone treatment clinic people that are opioid dependent. This was work that I did over 20 years ago. And if you ever want to talk about opioid dependence and what it involves and so on, it'll be, I'd love to do that. It's a really interesting topic to me. I'm going to shift gears a little bit and talk a little bit about behavior analysis and in particular the language of behavior analysis, and start off with a brief lecture pointing out some of the difficulties in understanding behavior analytic talk. So we know that behavior, what people do, what animals do, is a function of the situation, meaning it is influenced by the situation. And it's also influenced by the history of the organism. And we can divide that into 2 bits we call situational causes, or what's happening right now in the situation in the current context, and what's happened in the species' lifetime, or the individual's lifetime. The genes in that organism, its memories, its characters, personality, those we call dispositional factors. So we know that there are 2 influences in behavior, what we call situational factors and dispositional factors. When we speak English to describe behavior in common language, language is necessarily bipolar. It has this feature that causes precede effects. Nouns and verbs go together, independent variable, dependent variable. Even in the language of psychology, we see the independent variable causing changes and the dependent variable. So when we explain behavior, or talk about behavior, describe behavior, we either, because behavior is our subject matter, we either explain it through situational variables or dispositional variables, even though we know that both of them affect behavior. We can't talk about both at the same time because it's a feature of our language, I believe. So behavior analysts prefer situational explanations, but common folk psychology, or common language, the vernacular language, English that we speak with our friends, largely use dispositional explanations. So what sounds like an explanation to most folks is not an explanation to behavior analysis, nor what behavior analysts view as an explanation is seen as a cause or an explanation for most people. We almost talk past one another. So you could think about this as a really silly example, and that is if you were working with a small child in a school environment who had some problems with hitting. Why did Billy hit that girl? A behavior analyst explanation might be that it's a history of reinforcement. Every time Billy hits this girl, the girl gives him her toy. And that could be a suitable and perfectly fine explanation for behavior analysts. In folk psychology, they might say that he has oppositional defiant disorder, or that he's mean, or that he's experienced trauma, or that he has envy, and this is what drives behavior. So dispositional factors like envy driving behavior versus history reinforcement driving variables. So there are going to be some differences when you read and when I discuss some of these features, and I just want to get you to think a little bit about them or be aware of them as we proceed. So right now I'm going to turn next. You're going to be able to open up the next video, and I'm going to talk a little bit about the syllabus.